Let's go! Glad to have you here today. I'm Dr. David Hopkins, humanities professor. So glad to have you along for our talk today. We are continuing our series on examining wisdom literature across times and cultures. And this week we're staying in China for one more week. Now, it's hard to follow up Confucius for sure, but we're going to take a shot at it. Before we get too far, though, I want to welcome any new first-time listeners. If you are new, I highly recommend a couple things for you to maximize your time on this podcast and your overall personal understanding and growth and development. I would love to have you read along with me from the literary text that I'm reading from right now, and I'll continue to be reading for quite some time, maybe almost about 4 months or so. This book that we're looking at is called Readings in Ethics, Moral Wisdom, Past and Present. It isn't any book that I wrote, but it's an amazing anthology that is often seen in intro to philosophy courses or intro to humanities classes, even ethical courses at the college level. Heck, you can go back to college right now for free without the tuition or the parking problems. But first of all, here's what you should do if you're interested. Number one, subscribe to the free Substack course. The link is posted in the description. And then number two, get the book. We're studying Readings in Ethics, Moral Wisdom, Past and Present. We're reading through the book page by page, chapter by chapter, one podcast per week. We don't want to be overwhelming with the amount of content. The reading's only 20 to 30 page. Read that, listen in, interact in the Substack page. But yeah, sure, you can just listen into the podcast and you get everything you need to understand our talk today. But I'm telling you, if you read the book, you listen to the podcast, engage in the Substack material, your understanding of morality, wisdom, some of the greatest works of all time will grow dramatically. The Substack link, once again, is in that description below, so please subscribe to it. But enough of the introductory stuff. Let's get going. As I mentioned, we're going to spend one more week on another Chinese philosopher before we move on to a new culture and a new genius. And we're going to look at the incredible Buddha next. But for today, we're studying an individual. His name's Mencius, also known as Master Meng, and very often called Mencius in Latin and the English translation. He lived from roughly about 372 to 289 BC. To give you some context of when we're talking about, he's one of those ancient philosophers and sages. He was born in the kingdom of Zhou, and it's believed that he studied under the grandson of Confucius, who we were talking about last week. We don't know this for certain, though, and this may have just been some very smart marketing or propaganda to establish his scholarly credibility, since he claimed explicitly to be a follower of the school of Confucius. The truth is, we don't know for certain, and it really doesn't matter all that much, really, for our proposed purpose today, or as far as I'm concerned in general. So he was commonly been called the second sage after Confucius by the Confucians. We know little about the details of Mencius's life. He apparently became a teacher and a minister in the state of Qi, a scholar official who may have been associated with an academy which formulated and proposed policy for the government. We already know that for Confucius, that practical application of philosophy in government was extremely important to him. And Mencius was also very concerned with this. Mencius, he traveled extensively across China, and like Confucius and many other kind of itinerant or traveling scholars, they roamed around and they would offer advice and counsel to princes or nobility or the aristocracy in various states. And Mencius definitely made the rounds across China. So Mencius counseled men of noble origins, and he retained a deep knowledge of etiquette and protocol. His audience especially really was concerned with the traditional rites if they were going to hire him. They were men very fluent or at least very familiar with Confucius's teachings, which we already discussed in great deal in the last couple of lessons. And most of the men that Mencius counseled served as professional administrators in a bunch of different roles for local rulers. Mencius lived during the Warring States period, when the Chinese social and political order had finally just collapsed into utter chaos, warfare, devastation, and the decline of the Zhao dynasty eroded the authority of the central government, allowing lesser states and principalities that were basically vying for power in this vacuum. So life across the plains of China was a mess. Violence, hunger, distrust, upheaval are just some of the words I could use to describe what life would have been like living during this warring period. And to the thinkers of the time, like Mencius, these struggles suggested that the Zhao rulers had lost their mandate from heaven. This loss was attributed to a more general loss of virtue, which Lao Tse and Confucius before Mencius had already been just lamenting over and over in their readings, and we saw that as we went through the last couple weeks. But the pressing questions for Mencius and other Confucians was how to retrieve the old order and recover the stability of the past. In the thinking of that time, there was a matter of trying or figuring out how to rediscover the Tao, which just needed to be restored. And here, I think we could say Mencius was much like Plato and like other scholars of the time, because Mencius believed that the existing order, it could be redeemed, and hoped to find a ruler who would put his moral and political theories into practice. They were looking for a hero, really. Not a warrior hero, but a virtuous, honest, ethical, political champion that could restore and unite all the people and get back and regain that honor of the prior dynasties. The realities of the time were against Mencius. So no dynamic nor ethical leader ever emerged during his lifetime. And he eventually gave up on the idea of true political reform. And like Confucius, he finally just threw his hands in the air and withdrew to private life. Like many before him, the reality of politics, politicians, and power simply couldn't be reconciled to the hierarchies of corruption and the stratified state of Chinese politics. I'm pretty sure you and my frustrations with politicians and the political mess we have in America can help us appreciate the deep despair and the frustration that Mencius felt living in a state of political upheaval. So the teachings of Mencius have been preserved, especially in the Mencius. The Mencius became one of the 4 books in the Confucian canon, and it is regarded as a definitive source of Confucian doctrine. And it provides us with a very, very well-developed moral theory. The text of the Mencius, which you read in our book, contains numerous conversations between the philosopher Mencius and then various rulers on all manner of topic, with sustained philosophical arguments as the need for a virtuous sage to enter the political scene to rescue the state of affairs in China. Mencius, though, it wasn't like he was just accepted by everybody in the day, of course, and they had political and intellectual enemies as well. His 2 most influential opponents, if you ever wanted to research them, were Mosai and Yangsu. Mosai, M-O-Z-I, and Yangsu, Y-A-N-G-Z-H-U. But Mosai was a social reformer and a radical who preached universal love, and he neglected filial piety, which was so important to Mengzi. Yang Zhu, on the other hand, adopted a very liberal interpretation of the Tao that justified a very narrow self-interest, and self-interest not anything that's really a fan anywhere in Confucian philosophy. So Mencius rejects the positions of both of these philosophers, and he complains in a number of his writings that profit, which is what he accused his opponents of, is not a legitimate criterion in the ethical analysis, which in the end he was sure his opponents cared more about that than actually producing ethical works. So historically, it's evident that the moral concept of the Tao, that perfect, the idea of the perfection of the Tao, it narrowed over time. It got corrupted. And by the time of Mencius, it refers principally to the cultivation of personal virtue. So this grand metaphysical idea of the Tao is starting to narrow itself down by the time of Mencius. And those grand ideas that could be infused inside the rulers had pretty much been abandoned, and those pie-in-the-sky ideals were lost, and they were never recovered fully ever again. So we're kind of witnessing the end of this Chinese doctrine that we've been pursuing the last few weeks. The idea of the Tao. Nevertheless, though, it did still retain its social and it did retain a cosmological significance, even if it was sort of waning. I guess you could almost say in many ways, Christianity in the West has been on a decline. Church attendance is down. Those that believe is down. And it's been going down, sadly, for decades and decades now. But it's still a powerful force. And the Tao was still a powerful force in certain circles. But there is, in spite of that huge idealism, a more pragmatic side to Mencius's ethics than, say, Lao Tse or Confucius. And we can see this in his political realism. Maybe one of the most stark examples of this idea that a ruler who does not respect the principle of reciprocity in his dealings with the people is no longer following the way of a virtuous king, and is therefore no longer a legitimate ruler that needed to be removed by force if necessary. So when the killing of the Zhao, the last king of the Shang, happened, for Mencius, this was in one sense a sort of cosmic treason, because the Zhao had become corrupted and lost the mandate of heaven and was no longer a legitimate ruler, and his fate was sealed because of that downfall in his own morality. So the so-called idealism in Mencius's theory is more, I would say, a type of optimism that goes all the way back to the ancient Chinese idea that human beings are at their core good. I want to say that one more time. This idea at the core that human beings are good. So even if at the highest level of government, morality and ethics are lost, seemingly irredeemably lost, that doesn't refute the importance of the Tao or the Confucius ideals. It just means that rather than focus on the huge grand fixes at the highest levels of government, instead, people, you and I, the average person, in their own lives, can still effectively live out an ethical and moral life. It goes sort of like this. Since people are inherently good, it follows that acting ethically is ultimately a matter of acting in accordance with our natures. It shouldn't be acting ethically and morally. It shouldn't be some sort of a painful type of self-punishment to act with virtue, because our natural state is one of being virtuous and ethical. It just gets corrupted when we take the easy way out, when we get seduced by materialism and all the bad negative emotions and passions take hold. But at its core, you and I and everyone is naturally good and ethical. This idea explains why sincerity is the sign of the sage. it is by introspection, by reflecting on one's feelings and experiences, that one comes to know not merely one's nature, but also the nature of heaven. See that deep connection to the personal ethic and morality embedded in all of us? It's very similar to the Stoic concept, and we'll definitely study Stoicism later on in this course. The concept that when we look into ourselves, we in essence can find the meaning of the entire universe, as all things and all people are universally one, living in harmony. It's a beautiful thought. Mencius even argues that, and another part of the reading that I really want to hit on is just as our body, we have four external limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs. The mind / heart possesses 4 beings, or sprouts of virtue, as he called them. And under the proper moral guidance, these sprouts grow into the 4 most important Confucius virtues. So, number 1, what are these 4 sprouts of virtue, as Mencius talks about? Well, number 1 is benevolence, or the quality of being kind. Number 2 is righteousness. Number 3 is wisdom. Number 4 is propriety. So again, here we are with propriety. And I know I've mentioned it before, but I want to do it again because it's, for us in the West, it's maybe the toughest word and the toughest thing to kind of wrap our arms around. But it's something that we can all fully relate to. So propriety is the rituals, the virtues. How do I say this? Like demonstrating respect in our interactions with other people. Proper conduct in the proper situation that we happen to be in. You know, our conduct is different when we're addressing our parents, or we're hanging out with our friends, or we're in the workplace, or we're in a church, or wherever we might be. And we need to operate fluently and properly and effectively in whatever situation we find ourselves. And then we have the rituals, as we've discussed, and are so important to Confucian and Mencian philosophy. Because without propriety, society breaks down. So suppressing being a loudmouth when speaking to elders, focusing on being kind to the poor, following the rules of society, acting with respect and honor in all things are actions or rituals of the highest level. That's proprietary. That's leading a virtuous life. So benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, propriety. These are the 4 sprouts of virtue that all of us need to manifest. So the main point in all this is that the moral sensitivities that reside within every human being, every human heart, it can be developed through education, training, and in the end, it's going to lead to a stable and a virtuous character. This is achieved through a matter of habit. This is great news for you and I, as no matter how we have messed things up in the past, no matter how low we have gone, we can, in fact, elevate ourselves by changing our mind and changing our actions to be a better person today than we were yesterday. We should all find that incredibly refreshing. So the individual that does pay great care and it takes a lot of effort in being virtuous, despite the shortcomings that we all have as human beings, we can still reach a level of self-realization that elevates us to the position of a sage. A sage. You can become a sage. What an amazing thing. To be elevated to a person that people come to when they need wisdom, when they need help, when they need guidance. And they don't come to you, they don't come to a sage because you're so amazingly intellectual or smart, but because through the right effort and action, you've acted morally and ethically through tough situations, and you have established yourself with honor and respect. You, to the Mencian teachings, have reached a higher level of perspective few reach by practicing and right effort towards good that's inherent in all of us. You can reach that level. Anyone can reach that level. This elevation in academic terms has been described by many philosophers as a kind of virtue ethics. There is a psychological and even a physiological side to Mencius's view. Mencius's ethical practices extended to an almost mythical discipline, sort of like a practitioner of meditation. You know, if you've ever tried to meditate, it is not a simple and easy task. I've dabbled in it now and again, and although I attempt to quiet my mind with guided meditation, and I'm no expert at all. I've just tried some of it on like YouTube channels, and I'm not real great at just relaxing. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not a super relaxed kind of guy. I wish I was. I wish I was more of one. But in general, I'm wound pretty tight on most things, from politics to football. I'm just not the most calm and laid back kind of guy. I work at it. I do. I try, and I wish I was better at it. But I'm just not always very good at it. But for Mencius, becoming ethical and moral is much like the practice of meditation. It requires repetitive action over and over again, and a deep reflection of what's going on mentally, and then taking corrective steps when you run into failure. If it's anger, outside of meditation, if it's anger or being rude or aggressive or whatever, just like learning to quiet the mind in meditation, a person can work to get better and better at becoming ethical, to becoming moral, to becoming virtuous, to honoring the propriety. It requires nothing more than a deep willingness to try and pursue it. For Mencius, disciplined practice is needed to reach the state of a sage. It's just that it isn't just for like a genius with a high IQ. It's actually available to become a sage for all of us. So the heart and the mind can be developed and must undergo training at its highest level to produce that morally enlightened person and ultimately become a sage. For Mencius, becoming a sage should be a goal in your life. Yes, your life. This figure of the sage is prominent in Mencius because for Mencius, the sage has the power to transform the world. If leaders are not sages, catastrophic results are going to happen. In your own life, in your own family, if you're not leading in ethically, morally, and responsibly in your life, catastrophe can fall on your family and your community and in the world that you live. The stakes of the game for operating immorally are high, very, very, very high. And yeah, it might be your family, but you know, if you fall off an ethical and moral path, you can literally destroy your entire household. But remember, for Mencius, he lived in desperate times and felt literally that society could only be redeemed by a savior. And at the end of the Mencius, one of his greatest works, he asked directly, where is the sage? Where is he? This almost desperate, heartfelt desire to find a leader, any leader who possessed the virtuous characteristics of the sage, is prominent. Mencius just felt that the sage as a ruler was the only solution to the chaos and the violence and the starvation that the Chinese people were going through. And in our modern world and our modern sensibilities, the figure of the sage has become more of a moral rather than a political figure. Expecting to find sages in Washington, D.C., whether it's the president or the halls of Congress, or in any country for that matter, now almost seems like a comical, ridiculous ask. a complete impossibility. We can now view people like Lao Tse, Confucius, Mencius as sages. Yet they lacked the political power to make the changes in practice that they saw as virtuous in their philosophies. Their philosophies, sadly, fall short of the reality of the politics of the age. Now we tend to view the sage beyond the Chinese tradition of political leader and look at people such as Buddha, who we're going to study next, or Jesus Christ as sages for their amazing ethical teachings. And although superior ethical leaders or religious leaders speak of very similar knowledge, kindness, righteousness, wisdom, humility, propriety, humans, and especially political leaders fall short, way, way short. Yet for each of us, as Mencius says, quote, virtue is sure to be found if we seek it, unlike riches and external things. See, we can chase money, we can chase bigger cars, houses, clothes, our entire lives. And there's no guarantee you will ever get it. I mean, you might get wealthy, you might get power with the right combination of luck and talent and timing, and you might be happy with it, at least for a little while. But money and power and materialism, they're elusive. They're as elusive as grabbing a fistful of sand on the beach and expecting that some of that sand won't fall back to the ground. These material things they're not firm. The culture changes over time. Money comes and goes. Power comes and goes. Political parties are in power, then they're not. The material things of culture simply are not firm, nor is there any guarantee you're going to hold on to it forever or get it at all, for that matter. But becoming ethical and honorable, now that is in your grasp. That is within your power, because your choices will determine your outcome. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, man, woman, rich, poor. Becoming a sage is something you control and you can achieve in your lifetime with you making the right actions and taking it seriously, which is a message of hope for all of us. So with that, we've spent 3 full weeks and 3 chapters in China, but it's time for us to move on. We're moving south to India next, and we're going to study Buddha. Such a great, towering figure. Gautama Buddha, he was an ascetic. He was a spiritual teacher. He gave up everything. He was a prince, a wealthy prince. He lived during, kind of to put it in context, the first millennial of the BC. He was the founder. He gives it all up, becomes the founder of Buddhism, and he is revered by Buddhists globally as the enlightened being whose teaching sought a path to freedom from ignorance, craving, rebirth, and suffering. I can't wait to study him with you next week. For today, though, I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I hope you enjoyed the reading. Post answers to the discussion questions, or heck, even pose any other questions or comments that you might have. I would love to see them and respond to them. So with that, thank you once again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the readings from Mencius. He was a great sage and a great leader with some amazing ideas that all of us can implement in our life today. So with that, have a great week, and we'll see you again in the next lesson.